Disclaimer: Scientology is still cringe. Also, this video contains spoilers for Dead Reckoning and The Final Reckoning. There are time codes in the description if you want to jump around. We all have our missions? Alright, now let's do this for those we never meet. The year is 2018, and they've really figured something out. Creating a blockbuster franchise out of Bruce Geller's 1960s TV show has become something of a lifelong project for Tom Cruise. No matter what other commitment he's taking on, no matter what other genre he might be exploring, he always finds his way back to Mission Impossible. Starting with the 1996 original, Mission Impossible was the first movie Tom Cruise ever produced. Directed by Brian De Palma, it has become something of a 90s classic, bringing the tropes and customs of the television show to the big screen, centering around a pivotal heist to steal the knock list. After that, the series became defined by its constantly changing directorial visions. Each movie would have a new person at the helm to tackle the material in ways the series hadn't seen before. Where Brian De Palma took the first movie in a quieter, sleeker direction, John Woo went balls to the wall with ridiculous stunts and large explosions for Mission Impossible 2. I mean, there's motorcycle jousting at the end, it's crazy. J.J. Abrams took things further with a bit more of a character-driven approach to Ethan Hunt in MI3, coupled with tons of mysteries and open-ended questions that remain open-ended. But it wasn't until Brad Bird took the reins on Ghost Protocol that the series managed to find its footing, that it managed to figure out what it could really be. While initial plans stipulated that Ghost Protocol would be something of a reboot, transitioning the leading role of the series from Tom Cruise to Jeremy Renner, that's not how things shaped up. Because Jeremy Renner was not the guy dangling off the side of the tallest building in the world. Ghost Protocol defined the series on the idea that you would not only get to witness a fun action movie, but you'd also get to see Tom Cruise risking his life for your entertainment. A trend that only continued into Rogue Nation, where Tom Cruise held onto the side of an enormous cargo plane as it took off. And finally, the stunts reached their zenith with Mission Impossible Fallout, a movie chock full of insane sequences which were captured mostly in camera, or at least done as practically as possible. When you see Ethan Hunt riding a motorcycle through Paris or doing a halo jump or falling off the bottom of a helicopter, you can rest assured that Tom Cruise is actually doing these things. That's part of the appeal now. Come watch Tom Cruise risk his life in crazier and crazier ways. But Mission Impossible Fallout also changed one key aspect of the franchise's formula, because it was the first time a previous director in the series came back for a second outing. Having done some touch-ups during the production on Ghost Protocol, Christopher McQuarrie has become the other most significant voice behind the scenes, directing both Rogue Nation and Fallout back-to-back, working directly with Tom Cruise to create the best possible movies they could. What's surprising, however, is their approach. The two of them are not often beholden to what's written in the script. The script is very much so a blueprint for what the movie can be, but is not often what it actually becomes. Their approach has been described over the years as being almost improvisational. Their style has even been compared to what the characters are doing in these movies. They have a plan, complications arise, the plan goes to hell, they make a new plan. As much as it might seem like that will only result in utter catastrophe, it hasn't. Rogue Nation was received incredibly well upon its release, with critics and audiences having a great time, but that was blown out of the water with the release of Fallout. Taking a slightly more serious approach compared to its predecessors, centering on a more emotional journey for Ethan Hunt amidst the action set pieces. And it all worked together to create not only the best movie in the series, but one of the best action movies of all time. Despite the improvisational methods behind the scenes, or perhaps because of them, the sixth entry in the series managed to blow audiences away. And it scored big at the box office, raking in $791 million worldwide, becoming the highest grossing movie of the series, surpassing the previous peak by nearly $100 million. They've really figured something out. But as much praise as Fallout was able to garner, Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie had the same thought at the end of that particular journey. We can do better. The ceiling is always higher, the potential is always greater, and it's that exact sentiment that reignited their conversation going forward, where both Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise asked themselves one simple question. What would they want to do with the next movie? Their answers? They were pretty simple. Christopher McQuarrie wanted to wreck a train, and Tom Cruise wanted to jump a motorcycle off of a cliff. And that was all they needed to get things rolling on the next mission. This is where our journey begins again. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to follow along on this adventure into the next steps for Ethan Hunt and his team, encountering the greatest challenges they have ever faced. From the highs to the lows, this is where we return to the IMF. If you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot. Alright, this message will self-destruct in 5 seconds. So let's keep this moving. There were a lot of things Christopher McQuarrie wanted to tackle when it came to the next Mission Impossible movie. All of which managed to inform not only the specifics of the story, but the scope of what they were bound to tackle. While McQuarrie had already decided on doing a train sequence in Mission 7, he also had a fascination with submarines. Movies like Das Boot and Crimson Tide were huge inspirations, and McQuarrie wanted to have his own crack at that kind of story. But that also meant he brought in a bit of help. While McQuarrie would be writing and directing the next installment like he had on the previous 2, he brought in Eric Jendresen as another writer to capture what he was after. A writer who McQuarrie himself described as a bit of a nautical expert, someone who could really help shape the upcoming story and give it some real legitimacy, especially around the submarine. But that was only part of the pitch this time around, because the ambitions of Cruise and McQuarrie were far bigger than what they'd attempted previously. After giving Ethan Hunt an emotional arc in Fallout, something they were both quite proud of, they wanted to expand that in the next movie to give everyone an emotional arc to the same degree. Benji, Luther, Ilsa, whoever. But because Mission Impossible has garnered itself quite the ensemble cast, on top of whatever new players might emerge in this next movie, that kind of requires a lot of time to capture it all. Cruise and McQuarrie realized that in their efforts to give everyone an arc, they were approaching a story that was too big for one movie. Which is why it would not be just one movie. On January 14th, 2019, it was finally announced officially for the first time that the Mission Impossible series was continuing. Tom Cruise was once again reteaming with Christopher McQuarrie to create Mission Impossible 7 and 8. A 2-part grand spectacle of an adventure to take Ethan Hunt places he'd never been before. The 2 movies would be shot and released back-to-back, the 7th installment set for July 2021, and the 8th coming right behind it in August 2022. It'd be an enormous 2-part epic, one that might even close out the entire series. Whatever audiences were in for, it was bound to be big. And across 2019, announcements continued to squeeze their way out to give people just a taste of what they could expect in the next couple years. Among them all, casting announcements were predominant over the year, revealing that a number of faces from the previous movies would be coming back. Rebecca Ferguson was confirmed to return as Ilsa Faust, the breakout character from Rogue Nation who immediately became an exciting fan favorite, someone who livened up the series in ways people did not expect but immediately enjoyed. Following that, Simon Pegg confirmed his return as Benji Dunn, becoming one of the major regular cast members after being introduced in Mission 3. And of course, Ving Rhames was coming back as Luther Stickle. Outside of Tom Cruise, Ving Rhames has been the only cast member to appear in every Mission Impossible movie. He was there at the start, and he's still around heading into these enormous entries coming up. But of course, among the returning faces, audiences would also meet new characters. New people were going to join the party. In September of 2019, it was announced that Hayley Atwell was going to join the cast. As who? Well, no one knew that just yet. In fact, even the people behind the scenes didn't have a concrete idea of who this character was going to be. Which all feeds into the slightly improvisational nature of how these movies are made. Cruise and McQuarrie may have some idea, in a broad sense at least, of how these new characters factor in, but they're also not ones to hold on to those ideas like they're gospel. A lot of the time they cast people because they want to work with them, and they give them the freedom to find the best version of this character along the way. The same was going to be true with Hayley Atwell's addition to these movies, alongside some of the other new faces. As the year drew to a close, it was announced that Pom Klementieff was joining the cast, alongside Shea Whigham. But the announcements didn't stop there, as early in 2020, it was announced that Nicholas Hoult was going to join the cast as the movie's villain. He had originally auditioned for the upcoming Top Gun sequel, but while he didn't land a part in that movie, Tom Cruise liked him enough to keep him in mind for Mission Impossible. But of all of the casting announcements, perhaps the most exciting one, especially for longtime fans of the series, was that Henry Czerny was coming on board. Henry Czerny was in the very first movie in 1996, playing Kittredge, a bit of a thorn in Ethan Hunt's side. But he'd never been seen or heard from since, with other IMF leaders coming through in following movies. But Christopher McQuarrie had always been thinking about this character, thinking about if there was a way to bring him back. And it seemed, finally, in the 7th entry, there was a place for Kittredge to make a startling comeback. Things are moving now. The central cast has been put in place, pieces are shifting along the way for the start of principal photography, everything was getting prepared for a shooting start in Venice, Italy, where the ball would begin to roll down the hill. Except it didn't. Because despite plans being made to shoot in Venice, everything got enormously cut off by COVID. Before it had impacted the entire world, COVID had forced a lockdown in northern Italy, which forced the team to move south to Rome. However, that didn't quite work out either, because before long, COVID did impact the entire world. The planet stopped spinning for a minute as everyone was forced to remain at home to try and contain the outbreak as much as possible. And among the stoppages, the movie industry effectively shut down. Movies in post-production were delayed, movies in the middle of production had to stop, and in the case of Mission Impossible, movies bound to get started were cut off. Which of course brought in a couple of adjustments. On one hand, of course, we have delay number 1. Having initially been set for summer 2021 and summer 2022 respectively, both of the upcoming movies were pushed back by a matter of months. Mission 7 was now set for November 19th, 2021, and Mission 8 was set for November 4th, 2022. Not the biggest delay of all time, but clearly necessary to stave off the complications of COVID that were already looming large. And because of the sudden shakeup to the schedule, Nicholas Hoult had to drop out of the project. Instead, the lead villain role was to be taken over by Esai Morales, who is of course older, much closer in age to Tom Cruise, which opened up story possibilities that hadn't previously existed, of a character that could be tied back to Ethan Hunt's past, someone that could bring about a full circle approach to this story that was very exciting. But that was still a bit moot if the production efforts couldn't get started again, which of course became Tom Cruise's mission over the summer of 2020. And believe me, did he choose to accept. The goal was simple: get the industry back on its feet. How was he going to accomplish this? Well, lying, mostly. But like the cool kind of lying. A bit of trickery, if you will. Essentially, what Tom Cruise did, at least according to him, is that he got on the phone with a number of studio heads and other productions that were also sitting on their hands. And he said, "Are you guys shooting yet? Because we are." Of course, they weren't. But the other productions didn't need to know that. They would then return to their higher-ups and say, "Hey guys, Tom Cruise is shooting again, I think we can get moving." Tom Cruise would then bring this back to Paramount and Skydance to say, "Hey look, these other productions are getting moving again, that means we can get moving too." Just a little bit of trickery, just a little bit of deception to get productions on the move again in this newly evolving world. And it was because of that that Mission Impossible 7 was finally able to get off the ground once again, with additional funds being placed to help not only pay the crew during downtime, but also ensure safety protocols while filming, something that was going to be an enormous and unforeseen challenge for the team. But it was enough for the ball to start rolling. On September 6, 2020, production on Mission Impossible 7 began in Norway, which was revealed by Christopher McQuarrie's Instagram in the form of this image. An image of an enormous and lengthy ramp atop a mountain. What was it being used for? No one knew. Until the next day, where footage got out that this ramp was being used for Tom Cruise to launch himself and a motorcycle off the side of this cliff. Essentially, they kicked off the festivities with the biggest stunt they could muster. Filming in Norway continued for the following couple weeks, with even some footage captured atop a moving train, which was pretty neat. Following that, production moved on to Italy, capturing the footage they were looking for in Rome and in Venice, including an enormous car chase that was sure to be one of the movie's biggest sequences, all of which was being shot on Sony Cinealta Venice cameras, which actually makes this the first Mission movie to be shot digitally, with every previous outing being shot on film. Towards the end of the year, production moved to London, but it was here that something got out that no one really quite expected. In December of 2020, a piece of leaked audio made its way public of Tom Cruise rather loudly chiding a couple crew members for disregarding the on-set COVID protocols. Which, of course, considering what Tom Cruise went through to get the industry started again, on top of his very clear passion for filmmaking, he was quite upset that anyone on this production would jeopardize that.
I'm on the phone with every studio at night, insurance companies, producers, looking at us and using us to make their movies. We are creating thousands of jobs, you I don't ever want to see it again. Ever.
Now, as intense as this display was, it was also met with the very clear reception that it wasn't unjustified. Of all the things Tom Cruise has gotten in hot water over in terms of press, him getting mad at people disregarding safety protocols is perhaps the least of anyone's worries. There's a lot of other stuff you can be critical of Tom Cruise for, but worrying about the fate of the industry, the fate of people's jobs, isn't so bad. It's just a little intense. And it was thanks to this display that there were no COVID delays for a couple months, as filming continued into 2021. Production eventually moved to the United Arab Emirates, specifically Abu Dhabi, to film within the still under construction airport. And eventually, much more of the production returned to the United Kingdom, filming in various places in and around London to capture the smaller, dialogue-heavy, plot-driven scenes. The connective tissue between the larger action set pieces. You know how it is. But with 2021 underway, there was an announcement about how filming for not just MI7 but MI8 was going to proceed. Because while the initial reporting suggested that the two movies would film back-to-back, that was revealed to have changed. Instead, there would be a brief hiatus after the 7th movie wrapped up before the crew would jump into the 8th. And of course, we had delay number 2. There were still complications during COVID. As much as Tom Cruise was vocal about safety protocols, things still slipped through the cracks. And with the industry still slowly rebounding in 2021, things were forced back more and more as the months ticked by. Mission 7 was now set for May 27, 2022, and Mission 8 was set for July 7, 2023. At the very least, the movies are back to summer release dates. And Mission 7 visited CinemaCon in August of 2021, wherein a behind-the-scenes featurette was shown off to attendees only. But descriptions, of course, made their way online, revealing that it was a featurette all about that motorcycle jump that kicked off production. The big stunt, the showstopper for the 7th movie, which was eventually followed up by delay number 3. Well, I guess having Mission 7 sitting in the summer wasn't going to last, as it was now pushed back to September 30th, 2022. These movies just can't seem to catch a break, can they? At the very least, it was announced that principal photography had wrapped on Mission 7. So maybe, just maybe, with cameras put away, the September 2022 release date was going to stick. The September 2022 release date did not stick. As the year got underway, these two movies were hit with delay number 4. Mission 7 was pushed back to July 14th, 2023, and Mission 8 would follow on June 28th, 2024. Okay, have things settled down now? Are we all good with these dates? I sure hope so. There's been a lot of delays already. I'd hate to see any more down the line. Now, with new dates set up and Mission 7 having wrapped, once the clock turned to March of 2022, filming well and truly kicked off for Mission 8. Though as much as production was moving forward on the 8th installment, this also led to opportunities to pick up certain shots on Mission 7. Sure, production might have technically wrapped in September of 2021, but that didn't mean they were done. Instead, as they began to explore and discover the story of Mission 8 during shooting, they were able to go back and capture certain things that would help strengthen Mission 7. These movies are constantly evolving. They're constantly trying to find the best versions of what they can be. And thanks to the fact that these two movies are being shot not quite back to back, they have the same sets, the same cast, the same everything to be able to capture footage from Mission 7 and 8 at the same time. But of course, much of what had been going on was still being kept under lock and key. There were interviews, discussions, the occasional description, but there was still so much unknown publicly when it came to these two movies. When would audiences get to have a glimpse of it for themselves? Well, things slowly began to open up in April of 2022 as CinemaCon kicked off in Las Vegas, wherein Mission Impossible 7 made a big appearance. Although, because they were filming Mission 8, Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie did not make a physical appearance at the event. Instead, they made an appearance via a brief introductory video, which revealed Tom Cruise in South Africa leisurely standing on top of a flying biplane. That's one way to reveal what upcoming sequences audiences might be able to expect in the next two movies. A biplane chase scene of some kind where Tom Cruise once again threatens to kill himself on camera. This was, of course, an introductory video to two major surprises for CinemaCon attendees. On one hand, it was a direct lead into a full screening of Top Gun Maverick a month before that movie was set to hit theaters, but it was also joined with the first teaser for Mission Impossible 7, a teaser that was shown to attendees only. Man, I want to see some of this too. Ugh. Thankfully, descriptions made their way online, and we learned the movie's official title. In a truly pulpy display, the 7th entry was going to be called Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Perhaps the coolest sounding title for the series so far, and one that invited a lot of speculation as to what it could possibly mean. Eventually, it was revealed that Dead Reckoning is a nautical term, used for a specific type of navigation, where you track a moving object by only using a previously determined position. You're tracking it only in accordance with where it's been. You've got no other indicators beyond that, which was also going to tie into Ethan Hunt's central arc across not only Part 1, but also in the follow-up, which was sure to be named Dead Reckoning Part 2. As exciting as this was, though, there was still the wish to see footage from the movie for ourselves. I'm not making it out to CinemaCon anytime soon. I just gotta sit around and wait for things to be released publicly. Which finally happened on May 21st when the initial teaser for Dead Reckoning leaked online. Yeah, it wasn't initially released the way they intended, with copyright systems snatching any trailer that had been posted online. At least, at first, because just 2 days later, the full trailer was officially released online. Playing in theaters before Top Gun Maverick, audiences were finally able to catch their first true glimpse of Dead Reckoning Part 1.
You're fighting to save an ideal that doesn't exist. Never did. You need to pick a side.
Across 2.5 minutes, what we get here shows off very little in terms of plot. Instead, this is more of a sizzle reel than anything. There's little connective tissue right now, which makes sense considering the movie itself is still over a year out from release. But what we do see is quite fantastic. Not only do we get to see Kittredge early on, but we get glimpses of an enormous chase scene through Rome, a party sequence that looks interesting, a desert sequence, alongside brief looks at new and returning characters. Hayley Atwell and Pom Klementieff are here as newcomers, alongside familiar faces like Luther, Benji, and Ilsa. Ethan Hunt's even doing close-up magic again for the first time since the original movie. Really, this teaser is all about build-up, as the music continues to ramp up and up until it reaches a crescendo featuring the Mission Impossible theme itself. In all the times I caught this trailer in theaters, my hands couldn't help but tap away as that percussive beat played over the trailer's second half, all building to the reveal of the one stunt that kicked off this entire two-movie process. The biggest downside to this trailer is, of course, the fact that it's for a movie that's still over a year away. It's May 2022 and you're getting me excited for July 2023 already? Come on, man, I don't know if I can wait that long. I mean, I will. I'll be fine. But dude. If for nothing else, there were a lot of eyes on this trailer. Playing in front of Top Gun Maverick definitely gives you a promotional boost. I mean, that became the biggest movie of the summer. It was the definitive movie of the summer, actually, becoming only the second movie post-COVID to crack $1 billion at the worldwide box office, and breathing new life into movie theaters that managed to revitalize the industry. If that was any indication, the next Mission Impossible could see similar success when it rocked theaters in 2023. But as much as audiences were now getting jazzed about Mission 7, production on Mission 8 was continuing at the same time, with filming taking place in South Africa and even returning to Norway once again, just like Mission 7. But there were also a number of additions to the cast as 2022 continued, with a bunch of new faces joining. You have Holt McCallany, Nick Offerman, and Janet McTeer joining the party, alongside Angela Bassett, who is returning after having taken part in Mission Impossible Fallout. Now, she was initially set to return for Mission 7 as well, but complications with scheduling and COVID made that impossible. Instead, her role would exclusively take place in Mission 8, likely where the stakes were bound to be higher than they'd ever been before. At the same time, glimpses continued to make their way out of the 8th installment, though not how you might expect. Because on July 3rd, 2022, for Tom Cruise's 60th birthday, Christopher McQuarrie posted this. An image of Tom Cruise hanging off of a biplane in midair. Clearly part of the same sequence we'd gotten a glimpse of already, only this time it looks a bit more Mission Impossible-y. Though as interesting as the biplanes were, the more direct promotional efforts for these movies centered on the motorcycle jump in Mission 7. Because in December of 2022, playing in front of IMAX showings of Avatar: The Way of Water, audiences would get to see a behind-the-scenes reel all about that daring stunt, which was described as being the most dangerous stunt they'd ever attempted, not just for Mission Impossible, but in film history. In large part because, as the featurette details, there are so many variables and different aspects to the stunt that could both go wrong and complicate how the entire thing works. With all the different phases of how the stunt works, from the motocross to the jump itself, all the way to combining these two aspects and not getting tangled up with the motorcycle. I mean...
You know, the only things you really have to avoid while doing a stunt like this is serious injury or death. Here we go.
But of course, as we all know pretty well by now, Tom Cruise is nothing if not committed to the danger if it makes a sequence better. It's all about the audience and what they experience. And if him being there makes it better, he's gonna be there. And he's also gonna enjoy the hell out of it.
Always wear my earplugs so I don't hear myself scream.
Try not to smile.
All of which worked towards an enormous stunt which was being promised as the centerpiece for Dead Reckoning Part 1. And as this featurette made its way online, all audiences could do now was get geared up for what promised to be yet another enormous entry in the series. As 2023 got underway, Mission Impossible 8 was still in the works as filming continued in the early months of the year, which was given brief glimpses through two new additions to the cast. On one hand, Hannah Waddingham joined Mission 8 alongside Rolf Saxon? Wait a minute, hold on. There's no way. Rolf Saxon is coming back? He's been in this series before. He played William Donloe in the first movie, the guy that the team had to find a way to distract so Ethan Hunt could steal the knock list. A mission that proved so horrible for Donloe he was shipped off to Alaska without another word.
What about him? I want him manning a radar tower in Alaska by the end of the day. Just mail him his clothes.
And of course it was Kittredge who sent Donloe to Alaska. So really, we're gonna get the reunion of the century between Kittredge and Donloe in these next two movies. Now, not only was this a great surprise to the fans of these movies, who would have ever expected a comeback for William Donloe, but it was also a surprise for Rolf Saxon, who initially believed that he was being pranked when he heard that they were looking to bring him back. But of course, it was real. He was actually coming back for Mission 8, and it was going to be a major return for this character to kind of bookend this journey in an unexpected way. But that's Mission 8. That's so far in the future. Mission 7 is right around the corner, and in fact, going against tradition, its release was actually pushed up. After a series of delays, for the first time, the release of one of these movies was pushed up by 2 whole days. Now, Dead Reckoning Part 1 was set for July 12th, 2023, where it would stay, capitalizing on an extended weekend during the busy July month. This coincided with another appearance at CinemaCon in April, which came with a whole 20 minutes of footage which was shown off to attendees only. You know the drill by this point. But descriptions made their way out, which revealed that attendees were shown an enormous car chase through Rome, and got a great glimpse at Hayley Atwell's character in particular, a taste of her role in this entire thing. But while none of that was released publicly, eventually the promotional efforts did make their way online, as in May of 2023, the last stretch of promotion kicked off with Dead Reckoning's full trailer.
Our lives are the sum of our choices. And we cannot escape the past.
One of the first things you might notice when watching this trailer is that it has actual sound this time. Considering the original teaser came out over a year before the movie was set to release, there were no sound effects at all. They hadn't quite gotten to that part when making the movie. This time, however, there are sounds all over the place.
The world is changing. Truth is vanishing. War is coming.
This trailer expands on a lot of what we'd already seen. A car chase through Rome, Tom Cruise running, a staggering train set piece, and of course, the motorcycle jump. All of which built towards another exciting look at the upcoming movie, promising that this would be one of the biggest spectacles you could see in a theater in 2023. And following this trailer, promotional efforts took off with TV spots, featurettes, everything you could find to get audiences excited for the return of Ethan Hunt and the IMF. On June 19th, the world premiere of Dead Reckoning Part 1 was held in Rome, bringing together the entire cast to show off the movie for the very first time. It was big and exciting, and it also came with a bit of a hint towards where the franchise was going to go after all of this. Because as much as it seemed that a two-part movie like this would indicate this was the grand finale, Mission Impossible didn't necessarily have to work in that way, with Christopher McQuarrie himself saying that the series would end once it stopped being entertaining. Meaning if people were asking for more after Mission 8 hit theaters, McQuarrie and Cruise could be open to delivering more. For now, however, all eyes were on Dead Reckoning Part 1, the beginning of this two-part journey that promised to be bigger than anything the franchise had ever attempted, which was also confirmed by how insane the budget became during production. Given delays and COVID complications, the budget for this movie ballooned to nearly $300 million. For comparison, Mission 6 cost $190 million. These are big movies, but the increase in money spent this time around was sure to raise eyebrows, and managed to raise expectations about how much money this movie would have to make to break even, which was also combined with the increase in competition. July 2023 was a packed month for big releases. Not only was Dead Reckoning coming out right after the new Indiana Jones movie, but it was going to be immediately followed up by the release of Barbie and Oppenheimer the next weekend, which were proving themselves as a cultural juggernaut that had practically everyone's attention. While there were initial reports of the team behind Mission Impossible being a little fussed that they wouldn't hold IMAX screens for very long, with Oppenheimer taking over just a week later, there was eventually a bit of a peace offering, with Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie visiting the theater to see their fellow summer movies as a way of extending an olive branch, which was reciprocated by Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie right after. If for nothing else, there were many movies to choose from in July, and Dead Reckoning Part 1 was among the pile that audiences would be interested in seeking out. There's no shortage of things to see, it's just a matter of picking what movie and when. Or you're like me and you're like, oh my god, there's 50 cakes. And on top of it all, Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie also made it out to a number of fan screenings in the days just before release, where they'd visit fans who were eager to check out the latest Impossible mission, which also brought along this clip.
I love my popcorn. Movies, popcorn.
Tom Cruise and I are different in a number of ways. Some would say all the ways that really count, but I gotta say, I do like movies and popcorn at the movies. One day I'll even be able to say that in the exact uncanny way Tom Cruise does here. In any event, the movie of the hour finally arrived. After a number of delays due to COVID complications, Dead Reckoning Part 1 had hit theaters. It had been 5 years since audiences had seen Ethan Hunt on the big screen, attempting crazy, daring stunts to save the world, and now he was back. The IMF had returned to theaters with the first half of their most daring mission, and it was up to audiences to choose to accept. The clock is now turned to July 12th, 2023. So have a seat, get out your popcorn, and strap in, because it's time for our latest mission to begin. One of the staples of the Mission Impossible series is the opening credits. Taking its cues directly from the TV show, every movie has an opening credit sequence of some kind, where the main theme kicks in and you get a montage of imagery from across the movie that's only just gotten started. But the fact that the titles exist is not the only thing that makes them work. You also have to think about where they're placed. In the first 5 movies, the credits all occurred within about the first 10 minutes. You know, where you would usually expect to find the opening and the title card. There's a bit of a cold open, and then the theme kicks in and we're off to the races. The last movie, however, Fallout, held the credits until 16 minutes in. A bit of a longer wait. Nothing extreme, but certainly longer than most movies would hold something like that. But that is nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what we got here. Because this movie, Dead Reckoning Part 1, holds the opening credits until 28 minutes into the movie. Nearly half an hour of movie goes by before we get the titles. That's one hell of a cold open. We get the opening scene introducing us to a submarine called the Sevastopol, followed by Ethan Hunt getting his mission, as he always does, which then transitions into an action scene in the desert where Ethan is trying to get to Ilsa Faust, but he's just a little too late. Ilsa is killed during this skirmish, which is then followed by a big roundtable discussion scene involving all of the heads of the United States intelligence apparatus, which is of course hijacked by Ethan Hunt, resulting in a conversation between him and Kittredge, wherein we reveal that Ilsa Faust is actually not dead. She managed to escape. And finally, just as the walls begin to close around Ethan Hunt and we think he might not get out of this, he's putting on a Kittredge mask to sneak out without anyone being the wiser. Then, and only then, do we slam to the opening credits. It's kind of awesome that this movie had the confidence and the wherewithal to put the credits that late. But of course, it wasn't the original plan. As discussed by Christopher McQuarrie on this movie's commentary track, it was Tom Cruise who insisted on putting the credits where they ultimately landed.
Once we built this structure and presented it to Tom, we had the credits in a different place. Tom was very happy with the structure, and the only note he had was the credits are in the wrong place.
He says the credits have to come after a caper.
Come after a win. They should come after, you should have a lift when you go into the music.
Correct.
You want to feel a cheer. And we said, yes, but that's 28 minutes into the movie.
28 minutes, I know.
Nobody does that. And he said, yeah, but it's in the right place.
It's in the right place.
It just feels right.
So after a nearly 30-minute cold open, the movie well and truly kicks off. This time around, Ethan Hunt is going up against something called the Entity, which is described as a truth-eating digital parasite. The Entity is an AI supercomputer that is hell-bent on twisting the truth of the world through any means at its disposal. Anything digitally transferred can no longer be trusted, because the Entity has the ability to shift it and morph it to its bidding. The only way to stop the Entity relies on gathering two halves of a cruciform key, the central MacGuffins that everyone's after across this movie. The governments of the world, including Kittredge, who's now the director of the CIA, want to gather the key so they can control the entity, while Ethan Hunt wants to gather the key so he has the means to kill the entity. This is what it's all about, a race to acquire both halves of the key, which is ironically quite similar to another Paramount blockbuster that released just 1 month earlier. Because, as everyone on planet Earth was able to point out since they all saw the same movies I did, Transformers Rise of the Beasts also contains a hunt for two halves of one key. Maybe all Ethan Hunt needs to do in this movie is call on the assistance of Optimus Prime. He might be able to help out. But as much as this movie is ultimately about Ethan Hunt versus AI, and the perils that's brought with it, something very topical in this day and age, it also nearly explicitly doubles as the battle between Tom Cruise and God. Don't believe me? Watch this.
If anything happens to either of them, there is no place on Earth where you or your God will be safe from me.
Mission Impossible has been no stranger to quoting or taking from scripture. One of the central pieces of the first movie was the Book of Job. Here, however, that's taken to a slightly new level, with subtext breaking through at nearly all levels. While the Entity is our main villain, it has a messenger. And just like the messenger of God, this one is also named Gabriel. The man who presents a physical threat, the arm of the Entity, so to speak, someone who can enact its will with a few minor changes that can help ensure the Entity's ultimate objectives. But it doesn't stop there, because at the same time, the other most important character introduced in this movie is Grace. Grace storms into this movie shortly after the credits during the enormous airport sequence in Abu Dhabi. A fantastic display of spinning plates and moving pieces as all sorts of complicated events come into play, including a fake bomb, the Entity learning information about the team that will help dismantle them later, and of course the new element of Grace's arrival. Grace is the premier character in this movie, arguably the most significant character in the movie behind Ethan Hunt himself. And what makes her interesting is that in contrast to someone like Ilsa Faust, Grace is quite out of her depth here. She's not a spy. She's a thief. An expert pickpocket who's gotten herself wrapped up in the plot to acquire the key, entering a world bigger than she expects, which is highlighted rather spectacularly during the 20-minute car chase in Rome. A car chase that is essentially broken up into like 3 or 4 different sections. We got Grace in a cop car being chased by Ethan Hunt. They're all cornered briefly on the street, changing things up. Then, Grace and Ethan are handcuffed together in a BMW, which has its doors torn off for the next phase, until finally they enter a tiny little Fiat 500 which has been supercharged for the last stretch of the sequence. They move from place to place, racing across the stone streets of Rome, whilst also constantly switching places. It'd be one thing to see another action scene of Ethan Hunt getting chased around a city. We've seen that before. But by adding Grace, a character completely out of sorts, we get a whole new kind of energy here.
Go, go, go. Just go straight. Go straight. Go, go, go. Just keep going straight. Keep going straight.
Or left. Go, 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 go. You're doing good.
And it helps illustrate how, despite coming from two different worlds, these characters are ultimately destined to work together. That's how the whole scene evolves. Starting with Ethan having to literally chase Grace around, before forcing them to be tied together via handcuffs, all before they enter a state where they begin to trust each other to get out of the jam. They manage to work out some form of silent communication, and that's how they ultimately get away. It's sick. But that doesn't mean Grace is immediately part of the team. In fact, that is kind of the central arc for her character that takes us across the entire movie. Grace, being a thief getting herself wrapped up in the hunt for the key, has inadvertently destroyed any semblance of a life she might have had before. Whatever she had in the past, whatever she scraped together, it's gone. Too many people know who she is now, too many people will be hunting her down, the entity included. Which is why she will ultimately be offered the choice. Now, this is the biggest thing this movie introduces in regards to, well, the lore. Which seems an ill-fitting word for a series like this, but it does match up, because this movie changes how we think about the IMF. It's worth noting that the IMF has never been consistently defined across this series. Mission Impossible 3 portrayed it as a massive organization at the same scale as the CIA. Later movies, however, would portray it significantly scaled down.
It also tells me I can count on you to cover my ass, because coming over here from the CIA was a lateral move. Some say I stepped down, but I did it because of you.
When you get to Rogue Nation or even Fallout, it almost feels like the IMF only consists of Ethan Hunt and his team, and this movie all but doubles down on that. This movie re-mythologizes the IMF in a lot of ways. It may be a part of the United States spy apparatus, but the Director of National Intelligence, played here by Cary Elwes, doesn't even know it exists. The IMF is more like a small cog in the machine, a group of last resort that you call upon when no one else can complete a particular mission.
And who's in charge?
They're not ones to take orders in the traditional sense. We more or less leave word.
And on top of that, it's also revealed that every member of the IMF was brought in after they got in trouble with the law for one reason or another. Ethan Hunt was framed for a murder he did not commit. A murder committed by Gabriel, in fact, which was enough to put him away for a hell of a long time unless he made the choice. The very same choice that will be presented to Grace here. The choice to join the IMF and be a ghost.
We live and die in the shadows. For those we hold close. And for those we never meet.
This, of course, does feel a bit contradictory to what we've seen before in this series. What with the secretary of the IMF and the fact that the president himself initiated Ghost Protocol back in the fourth movie, stuff like that. Not to mention, what the hell did someone like Benji do to make the choice? Maybe he hacked into the Pentagon or something, who knows? But it does fit really well into the mesh created by this movie in particular. It's a great setup for the entire emotional journey that Grace goes through in this story. It ties back to Ethan Hunt's past, which is only hinted at a little bit here. And it also ties into how Ethan receives the mission at the very beginning, by a new recruit into the IMF who's probably on his very first assignment and hasn't quite figured out the ropes of the job.
Welcome to the IMF. You made the right choice.
Sir?
And that at least implies that even though we are mainly following the adventures of Ethan Hunt and his team, there are other IMF agents out there on other missions. It is bigger than the one team, even if it is still substantially smaller than something like the CIA. Grace is of course not the only character we have here though. Once again, we're joined with a handful of old friends from previous movies. We've got Benji and Luther back on the team, which is a lot of fun, and even provide some brief callbacks to the first movie. Nothing that you generally have to know to enjoy this one, but stuff that adds a bit of detail for those paying attention to the series as a whole.
What did they used to call you? The Net Ranger? Phineas Freak?
Ethan, would you care to explain to our friend the Net Ranger how I am just as capable of writing code as he is?
No comment.
Oh, what, you figure that Phineas Freak here is going to single-handedly work out a way to kill the entity while I just hold his soldering iron?
Probably.
Definitely.
Alana Mitsopoulos, also known as the White Widow, is back from Mission Impossible Fallout. She herself also ties back to the first movie as she is the daughter of Max. Here she's caught in the middle of this entire hunt since she carries one half of the key everyone's searching for, and must make a deal to secure some freedom and an immense amount of power. Who's she making a deal with? Well, Eugene Kittredge, of course, also back from the first movie in an equally antagonistic role towards Ethan Hunt. These two characters are going to blows again like 25 years haven't gone by. It's almost uncanny, but that's also part of the fun.
I can understand you're very upset.
Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset.
I understand. You're upset.
I'm not upset, Kittredge.
Gabriel's got muscle on his side in the form of Paris, played by Pom Klementieff, who's essentially a battering ram through the movie. Someone who rushes through and creates havoc at every turn. What's fun, though, is that she also exclusively speaks French, which wasn't originally the plan. It was only after Cruise and McQuarrie learned that Pom Clementieff's first language is French that they decided to pivot the character in that direction, giving her something unique and distinct compared to some of the other characters. Two of the most fun additions this time, however, have to be Jasper Briggs and Theo Dega. Shea Wiggum and Greg Tarzan Davis are great players here, the latter of whom comes right off the back of being in Top Gun Maverick. They're playing the role of the official services trying to hunt down Ethan Hunt. It's a role that's been filled by other characters in previous movies, but by being a duo, they get to have a completely different dynamic. Dega gets to be slightly more reserved, maybe even considering the perspective of the IMF with an open mind, while Briggs gets to be a little bit nuts.
Everybody out! Back of the train!
That's without even mentioning the bit where he tries to peel off the iconic IMF masks on anyone, regardless if they're actually wearing one or not. He even tries to do it with Kittredge. The ensemble gathered here, like a lot of these movies, is quite entertaining. There are a lot of moving pieces, but with each one that enters, you find yourself getting excited in a different way. Like, uh-oh, now that Briggs and Dega are here, how does that complicate Hunt's current mission? But that also leads us to one last character. A character I do like, but is given a moment that I'm still trying to wrap my head around to this day. And that's Ilsa Faust. Ilsa Faust was a revelation for the series when she was introduced in Rogue Nation. A perfect foil for Ethan Hunt that provided a new ingredient these movies didn't already have. She was fun, capable, and could probably best Ethan Hunt in most fights, which gave them a really cool dynamic, something that only continued in Fallout and even some of this. But of course her biggest moment in this movie is her death. Ilsa Faust meets an untimely end here, something that I did not expect in any way, and I'm left feeling a little bit conflicted about it. Because on one hand, the setup is pretty dense and well thought out. Everything leading up to this point has essentially been constructed by the entity. As a show of its power, it has gotten all of these players into one place. There's all this dialogue about not being able to trust communication if it's sent digitally, and both Grace and Ilsa have been brought here as a result of some amount of digital communication. There are real forces at play, but it's also obvious that the entity has orchestrated this to some extent. The entity knows that the best way to get to Ethan Hunt, the best way under his skin, is to threaten or even kill someone he cares about. That's the conundrum placed in this moment. The entity has ordained that either Grace or Ilsa will die, and as a result, the completed key will place itself at Gabriel's feet, ensuring their victory. Not to mention, once the action gets going and Ethan is racing to try and save both Grace and Ilsa, the entity takes over their comms and leads him astray. The entity is in complete control, which is also highlighted by the music. Lorne Balfe is here for the score this time around, coming right off of doing the music for Mission Impossible Fallout. And while he's going for a different sound here, it's quite effective, especially during this central piece of music during this scene. Music evoking the sound of the Mission Impossible theme, but played with a hint of tragedy. This is the theme for when everything the IMF is attempting is going wrong. And it all builds to the moment where, despite his best efforts, Ethan is ultimately foiled by the entity, as he's too late to save Ilsa from being stabbed in the heart by Gabriel. Now, all of this is pretty well constructed in a lot of ways. What gives me pause is twofold. On one hand, this is a pretty big example of the trope known as fridging, in which a female main character is killed purely to motivate the actions of the male lead. This movie does kind of hang a lantern on that because it points out how much this is a trend in Ethan's life, tying all the way back to Marie, the woman killed by Gabriel that led to him making the choice. Later, you have someone like Naya in Mission 2, Julia in Mission 3, before we get to Ilsa and, of course, Grace in this movie. This does create a feeling of, oh, Ethan just has a revolving door of brunettes that are constantly being put in danger. But at least the movie is acknowledging it, right? The other thing is that I do feel a little dissatisfied with the death overall. It is my personal biggest knock against this movie, and I was convinced for the longest time that it was going to be a fake out. It just didn't seem like enough of an end for a character like this. There had to be something more. I was riding the train that Ilsa had faked her death here as a way of tricking the entity in the next movie. Of course, the movie had already done the Ilsa faking her death bit at the very beginning, so running it a second time might be redundant, or them doing that trained me not to believe this scene at face value. I don't know. In any event, my guess was not the case. It was later revealed by Rebecca Ferguson that she had her own reasons for wanting to leave the series as much as she was enjoying it. The primary reason being that these movies take a really long time to make, and in the time it would have taken to be part of Mission 8, she was able to film her parts for Dune and Silo. She has other opportunities that she took advantage of, and as a result, Ilsa was written out of this series. And with that context, they did about the best job you could ask for. I'm still not over the moon, I'm still conflicted, but knowing that this is it helps me look at it a bit differently. It is crazy just how many brunettes Ethan Hunt has put in danger though. Like, if you're a woman with brown hair and you run into Ethan, you better watch out, holy. This does, however, bring Grace further into the fold, making her a part of the team as we head into the final act, with all the emotional punch that we've been feeling for the previous 2 hours. The danger is evident, and despite the fact that Ethan can't promise that Grace will be safe during all of this, he does assure that he will do all he can in service of protecting her and his team.
You don't even know me.
What difference does that make?
And so, all roads lead to the train. The final set piece of the movie, which I've got to say is pretty fantastic. I like a lot of what's going on here. We've got a healthy mixture of high-octane action and spycraft, the latter of which comes with Grace's role in the whole thing. Because in true Mission Impossible fashion, she has taken on one of the iconic masks to impersonate Alana Mitsopoulos and make the deal to discover what the two halves of the key really unlock. And in terms of performance, you really can't ask for anything better than this. As an audience member, you always revel in these kinds of scenes, where one actor already in the movie is playing a different character than they were previously. It helps draw a concrete line between the two and shows off what actors like that can do. Mission Impossible has provided opportunities like that before, namely Philip Seymour Hoffman's brief stint as Ethan in the third one. But this takes it to a whole other level, with Vanessa Kirby playing Hayley Atwell, playing Grace, playing Alana Mitsopoulos. The fun detail, of course, being the color of her eyes. Vanessa Kirby has blue eyes while Hayley Atwell has brown eyes. So, since Grace is impersonating Alana Mitsopoulos, her eyes are tinted brown as a subtle indicator of who's who. It's never explicitly addressed in the movie, but it's a great little thing that adds something really fun to the scene. It's a sequence that you can really explore to the fullest in Mission Impossible, and boy does this movie take the opportunity in stride.
This one.
You know her?
Oh, let's just say she's not exactly hard to miss.
Well, if you got to know her, you'd see she'd have a few good qualities.
But that is, of course, only one half of the sequence, because while Grace is trying to make this deal, even trying to find her own way out of this whole scenario without making the choice, Ethan is desperately trying to find his way onto the train. In another show of the entity's future-seeing powers, it enlists Gabriel to sabotage Ethan's initial attempts to board the train, speeding the thing up and preventing anyone from stopping it. This is a runaway train, and the only way for Ethan to get on board is to jump off of a mountain. Here it is, everyone, the big stunt. The centerpiece of the marketing, the big shot in all the trailers, the shot on the poster. This is the moment for Dead Reckoning Part 1. And I do really enjoy the setup, because as much as Tom Cruise is a daredevil who likes to risk his life for entertainment, Ethan Hunt is not. Ethan wanted to find a much safer way to get on the train, and is instead forced to jump off of a cliff out of necessity. He clearly doesn't want to, and that's how you can tell Tom Cruise is a good actor, because he has to pretend he's not enjoying every second of this. But that, of course, leads us to the stunt itself. After some build-up, after putting all the pieces in place, Ethan Hunt rushes off and... The question is, was this underwhelming? I mean, it's a great stunt. It's a technical achievement. There are so many factors working against the crew and Tom Cruise to pull it off, but why doesn't it hit quite as hard as previous stunts? There are two leading theories. One is that there's too much CG in the final shot. We all know they built a ramp for Tom Cruise to jump off of, which has been replaced with a suspiciously ramp-shaped ridge atop this mountain. I'm not necessarily put off by this myself, but people have criticized that there being so much fake in the shot kind of takes the air out of it being real, which I can understand. What I think is more damning against the stunt, though, is that by the time this movie came out in theaters, we'd seen it like 20 times. It was in both trailers, it got a behind-the-scenes featurette, it was the main talking point since production started 3 years before the movie was out. I mean, by the time you see it on the big screen, it feels like we've been here before, because there's not that much more to the stunt beyond the shot itself. Compared to something like the helicopters last time, which were an entire sequence, you can show off a handful of shots in the trailers and still keep many of the surprises at bay for the finished movie. That's not as possible here. What I'd be really curious to see is how would someone react to the stunt 10 years from now? Someone watching the series front to back for the first time not having any of the baggage of promotion. Does the effects still work? Does it improve without all of the marketing? Who knows? That's something we'd have to wait and see. This does, of course, bring Ethan onto the train, as everything builds into the final set of sequences in a mad rush to obtain both halves of the key. Ethan and Gabriel fight on top of the train, which is great. It almost reminds me of the climactic fight between Ethan and Jim Phelps at the end of the first movie, though with a different level of intensity. Not to mention the fact that some of what's here is real, whereas everything in the first movie was against a green screen. But the sequence that really gets me, the part of this movie that I couldn't stop thinking about after coming out of the theater, is the very last stretch of action. Because as the pieces fall into place for this movie's conclusion, the bridge ahead of the runaway train is destroyed. So Ethan and Grace have to make their way through train car after train car as they each one by one fall into the river below, and it is exhilarating. I understand if most people are tuckered out by now, but this is exactly my kind of jam. As much as it's fun to watch these characters fight and see them go to blows in one way or another, it's just as much fun to bring it all back to bare essentials. This scene doesn't require a complex motivation for a villain. It doesn't require an ethical or moral dilemma. It is Ethan and Grace fighting against gravity. Their enemy is unstoppable. The only victory is escape, and it's a narrow escape at that. One by one, each train car falls, with their own complications shoved in our heroes' faces. It's fantastic, especially during the brief moment where gravity is nearly flipped on its head. It's only a couple minutes, it's after the plot has essentially resolved, but damn, it's exciting. And thanks to the efforts of Paris, both Ethan and Grace managed to narrowly avoid disaster. Boom. Ethan has escaped, he's made his way out, and everything is put in place for the midpoint in this entire two-movie adventure. Ethan now has both halves of the key, having stealthily snuck it away from Gabriel. Luther has gone off the grid to find any means of killing the entity. Grace has come face to face with Kittredge and finally makes the choice to join the IMF. And at the end of it all, Ethan learns the one piece of information he's really been seeking. That the key can be used to unlock the entity's source code, which is located within a downed submarine called the Sevastopol. With the key in his possession, Ethan's next step is clear. Find the Sevastopol, get the source code, and kill the entity. All of which will come in Part 2. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is not the best entry in the series. It does not quite surpass the glory of Fallout, and probably also falls short in some ways compared to Rogue Nation. It is, however, still, I believe, a very exciting entry, with tons of great set pieces, lots of memorable moments, a killer last few minutes, and fun character beats to boot. Critical reception was very positive, with many outlets praising the action, intensity, the excitement. Even if reception wasn't as glowing as it had been for the last entry, people were still coming out of this quite thrilled. However, not everyone did. This movie was met with a fair amount more criticism compared to its recent predecessors, with the primary critique being, it's just too damn long. This movie clocks in at a whopping 2 hours and 43 minutes, making it the longest Mission movie so far. Now, I myself have no real issue with the runtime. I'd be a bit hypocritical if I did. but I do understand why someone would think this entry is more exhausting compared to previous ones. One bit of criticism I find fascinating though, not one I necessarily agree nor disagree with, but like to parse, is all about how the movie opens. The criticism is as follows. The entire movie centers around our characters hunting for the cruciform key, but no one knows what it unlocks, except for the audience. Because the movie opens by directly showing us the Sevastopol and what the key is actually used for. The whole game is given in the first 5 minutes. The question is this a good choice? Or does chasing the mystery work better? Because as much as dramatic irony is a fantastic tool when used right, it can be a bit tiring to be one step ahead of the characters for the entire movie. Is it a benefit to have this information up front when the characters don't learn it until the end? Or is it better to learn at the end with the characters? I don't know. Because on one hand, I understand the impulse to keep things obfuscated, leaving things open for exploration in part 2. But at the same time, the argument for clarity at the jump is also well thought out. There's merit to both approaches, and I for one really quite enjoy the submarine scene that kicks off the movie, so I'm not really advocating for its removal. The question is more about if it would be better served by waiting until part 2. Maybe it could have. Maybe it would be better to be as in the dark as the characters, trying to uncover the secrets with them. Or it's just as fun to keep the Sevastopol in the back of our mind and letting it come to the forefront once Ethan and the others discover it right at the end. Not to mention, it serves as a very solid introduction for the entity, which might not be the case if it's held for the beginning of part 2. In any event, the submarine is going to be a major part of Mission 8, where we're bound to face off the entity once more in an enormous final stand. Now, while critical reception was overall quite positive, with both fans and critics largely satisfied with the latest exciting entry in the series, the box office told a slightly different story. Because despite the promotional efforts behind it, despite how high expectations might have been, Dead Reckoning Part 1 did not reach the same heights as Top Gun Maverick did last year. It didn't even reach the same heights as Mission 6. Across its opening weekend, Dead Reckoning Part 1 made $54 million, a smaller take even compared to Indiana Jones 5, which released just 2 weeks prior. And over its entire run, it managed to rake in $172 million domestically and $571 million worldwide. Now, for most other movies, this would be a rather spectacular haul. But for two major reasons, this was a bit of a disappointment. On one hand, it fell short of the box office for the previous 3 Mission movies, not just the franchise high with Fallout, and given that the movie cost nearly $300 million to produce, it probably didn't break even. Like a handful of other big movies in 2023, Dead Reckoning struggled in ways I don't think people really anticipated, which can, at least in part, be laid at the feet of Barbenheimer, the cultural juggernaut that was stealing the air out of a lot of the conversation, and happened just 1 week after this movie released. Not only do you lose premium screens to Oppenheimer and Barbie, but you also lose a lot of the attention as well. Those were the box office hits that defined 2023's summer movie season, and Mission Impossible was left to the wayside. It's also worth noting that Mission Impossible was probably never going to be as universal a franchise as Top Gun. It doesn't have the same appeal, even if it has just as much going for it. But what this left everyone with was a slight shift in the air and a notable recalibration heading into Mission 8. One can only hope that the right lessons are taken away and that this team continues to stick to their guns and create the best Part 2 we could hope for. After all, its release is only 1 year away. Once June 2024 arrives, we're going to be able to watch Ethan Hunt finally take down the entity once and for all. Unless, of course, everything gets thrown on its head. Again. After all the hiccups these two movies have faced during production, why not hit them with just one more? On May 2nd, 2023, 2 months before Dead Reckoning's release, the Writers Guild of America went on strike. Now, while this was initially believed to halt production on Part 2, that wasn't the case. Production continued even with the writers' strike ongoing. However, just 2 days after Dead Reckoning's release on July 14th, SAG-AFTRA also went on strike. Production had to halt after that, putting a sudden stop to Part 2's shooting schedule. All of this provided us with delay number 5, which thankfully is the final delay for either of these movies, but proves that even though one of them had already made its way to theaters, that didn't mean they were completely out of the woods. as now Mission 8 was pushed back from June 2024 all the way to May 23, 2025. This is where it would remain, but that still added an entire year of waiting to see the conclusion set up by Dead Reckoning Part 1. Though this did bring about another piece of news. This also revealed that Dead Reckoning Part 2 would not be called Dead Reckoning Part 2. Following the tepid financial response to Part 1, it seemed the powers that be wanted to separate Part 2 a little bit more. What was it actually going to be called? No one knew yet, but it wouldn't be referred to officially as Part 2. Which of course brought along some ridicule because now we've got Dead Reckoning Part 1 and, technically, no Part 2? Like, the next one's just a different movie? Well... After the strikes had all wrapped up and 2024 came around, Dead Reckoning made its way to Paramount Plus, and in accordance with the second half getting a retitle, the first half followed suit, removing Part 1 from the official marketing. Mission 7 was now simply called Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, which would be followed up by whatever Mission 8 would be called in 2025. It does make me wonder if one day in the far-flung future, having a copy of Dead Reckoning that still says Part 1 is going to be considered like rare media or something. All other proof of this movie's existence will just be Dead Reckoning. But those of us that were there, those of us that saw, we know the truth. It was Part 1, and it will always be Part 1 in our hearts. Or whatever. In any event, despite initial plans for an explicit two-part story, the movies were getting retitled, even if Mission 8 was bound to be a direct follow-up to the story that began with Dead Reckoning. It was only a matter of getting the movie back on its feet for release in 2025, which finally came around in March of 2024. After an extended hiatus and surely some rethinking across the board for what Mission 8 could be, production resumed. The cast and crew reunited once more to begin the next string of production, the last stretch to get the 8th movie captured and through the door, with filming taking place across the United Kingdom, particularly London, where Tom Cruise was seen running, of course. But this also brought along a handful of additions to the cast. There are still new faces coming through to join Ethan Hunt on what might be his last adventure. Katie O'Brien joined the cast in March, followed soon after by Tremel Tillman in April, and eventually Stephen O. Young was announced to join in July, which, crazily enough, came after Simon Pegg revealed that his part of production had concluded. So they're still making changes, still adding elements even after major aspects come to a close. The improvisational and constantly adjusting magic behind these movies continues to astound. It's gotta be a miracle that the movies turn out as entertaining as they do. Though, weirdly enough, press surrounding Mission 8 wasn't just centering around the continuing production, because Tom Cruise also visited the closing ceremonies of the Paris 2024 Olympics, where he'd essentially pick up the torch from Paris to pass it along to Los Angeles, which is set to host the Olympics in 2028, including a wire stunt into the venue, a skydiving stunt, which is crazy, and finally a wide shot of the Hollywood sign refurbished with the Olympic rings. Even amidst filming on biplanes and capturing the biggest sequences Mission Impossible had ever attempted, he still made time to leap into the Olympics with a bit of an extra show. Eventually, production on Mission 8 came to a close by November 2024, putting cameras away for what we can only presume will be the last time. For Tom Cruise, for Christopher McQuarrie, for everyone in this series, they had now wrapped the biggest, boldest, and definitely most expensive production for Mission Impossible. Because, as reported, the budget of this 8th installment managed to balloon even beyond the budget for Dead Reckoning, landing in the neighborhood of $400 million. All of the setbacks, delays, COVID complications, everything added up to a production that cost probably way more than anyone expected. But of course, when you have Tom Cruise on your production, whatever he says goes. And no matter what, this movie is still hitting theaters in just 6 months. Which means it was finally time to get the promotional game kicked off. While this 8th movie didn't have quite as lengthy a promotional cycle as Dead Reckoning, it did still get the ball rolling as November 2024 came around. With a first trailer playing in front of Gladiator 2 in theaters, audiences were now able to catch a glimpse at the second half of this journey, the ultimate battle between Ethan Hunt and the Entity.
Everything you were, everything you've done, has come to this.
Across just 2 minutes, this trailer is all about spectacle and stakes. As Kittredge himself says, everything has come to this. The journey across all 8 of these movies is going to coalesce here in this installment, promising to be the biggest entry yet, one with some real genuine finality to it.
When the need for certainty is absolute and the odds are deemed impossible, the mission falls to him.
Should he choose to accept?
Giving us glimpses of some incredible sequences, like the promise of Ethan Hunt finding the Sevastopol and gathering what's inside, all the way to the biplane sequence. The sequence we've been hearing about for nearly 3 years by now, which is going to be the ultimate selling point for this entire adventure. But there was one rather unexpected surprise among everything. Within all the action shots and reveals of returning characters and a new look for the team, we also get this. Ethan Hunt retrieving the rabbit's foot. Now, this shot has never been seen before, and was created for Mission 8, but it is very clearly a tie back to Mission Impossible 3. Back then, the MacGuffin everyone was after was called the rabbit's foot. Benji even referred to it as the anti-god. But the truth behind what it was completely elusive. Given that that was a J.J. Abrams movie, they kept details regarding that thing pretty close to the chest. They didn't even know what it was when they were making the movie. They didn't have to.
The rabbit's foot. What is it?
But that, of course, leaves the door open for a future installment like this one to do whatever it wants. The rabbit's foot has remained undefined, but it seemed after nearly 20 years since Mission 3 hit theaters, there was going to be an answer. We might just find out what that thing was, and of all the excitement this trailer brought, from its spectacle to its scale, this little shot was probably the most interesting reveal for longtime fans. We're in for a ride next May, everyone. We're in for the biggest adventure of our lives.
I need you to trust me. One last time.
And at the end of it all, we get the title, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Honestly, I was expecting something a little different, but it does fit, and firmly markets this movie as the grand finale. As much talk as there has been of continuing this series past this two-parter, it seemed they were hedging their bets on calling this one final in a big way. All I can really say is, I'm on board. I'm ready to trust Ethan Hunt one last time, because I can only imagine he's not gonna let us down. As 2025 got underway and the countdown towards the final reckoning continued, promotional efforts didn't slow down. Mission 8 made its way to the Super Bowl at the start of February, revealing an all-new 30-second spot, which honestly didn't reveal that much more compared to the initial teaser, but it did come with a fun visual of an expanding aspect ratio, where the black bars shrink more and more, revealing more of the picture, until the biplane stunt at the very end filled the entire screen, kind of promising some shifting aspect ratios if you were to see this movie in IMAX. But the real showstopper came just 2 months later. On April 7th, 2025, the second and full trailer for The Final Reckoning went online, providing audiences with the best possible look at Ethan Hunt's last stand.
A CIA Black Vault break-in.
Am I reading this correctly? The Kremlin bombing? In fairness, the bomb was actually meant to kill him.
One of the biggest aspects of this trailer is how it calls back to the other movies. There's a sense of almost destiny to the entire affair. The marketing, and it seems the movie itself, are trying to paint this as the culmination of everything Ethan Hunt has done so far. Every adventure, every mission he's ever taken on, it's all been building. As much as this is mostly an anthology series, it always has Ethan and his team at the center of it all. And as they go up against the Entity in a daring play, it's going to put everything to the test. High emotions, big action, biplane, spectacle, everything you could ask for, on top of a promise of fate to bring it all together.
This was your calling, your destiny. I have no regrets. Neither should you.
From there, promotional efforts continued in a major way, with TV spots and featurettes releasing in the last weeks to tease this final mission. And among the news coming out of this last stretch, it was also announced that the voices behind the music this time were going to be a bit different. Lorne Balfe, who'd composed the score for the last 2 mission movies, had stepped away, leaving room for Max Arouge and Alfie Godfrey, the former of which was credited with additional music on Dead Reckoning. This was in large part because of the last year-long delay, on top of how ever-changing these movies tend to be. Lorne Balfe had other commitments, and Mission was just taking too damn long and shifting too much, so he had to drop out, leaving 2 others to take on the brunt of the final Reckoning's music. The countdown continued from there, as on May 5th, 2025, the movie had its world premiere in Tokyo, Japan, followed by another premiere at Cannes just a week later. The movie was opening up. People were getting a chance to see the final Reckoning with their own eyes, and among the fan base, excitement was reaching a fever pitch. There may have been a slightly more tepid response to Dead Reckoning, but given that this was the second half, this was promising to not only have an ending, but be the ending. The cards were stacked in favor of this movie being an utter success, and I for one can say I was over the moon ready for this installment. In fact, I can pretty clearly remember saying that this will be the greatest movie of all time. And maybe I was being a bit hyperbolic, but come on, are you kidding me? After everything we've seen, there's no way this doesn't completely knock my socks off. A big practical effects blockbuster that promised to close out this 2-parter and this series? We're in for a hell of a good time, I can almost promise you that. The countdown eventually drew to a close, as all pieces were in place and the final Reckoning hit theaters. After 2 years since Dead Reckoning's release, after 7 years of this entire 2-part journey taking Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie around the world, and 29 years since these movies first kicked off, it was time to put our trust in Ethan Hunt one last time. The clock had turned to May 23rd, 2025. So get out your popcorn and take your seats, because it's now time to accept our Okay, where to begin? There are times where you enter the movie theater on cloud 9, where you fully believe that you're about to watch something incredible, something monumental, and then you leave disappointed. You expect magic, and you leave with a furrow in your brow. I was almost shocked seeing this movie for the first time. I was startled watching it play out and realizing I wasn't jiving with it like I wanted to. There was honestly no part of me that expected this movie to drop the ball, or any ball for that matter. And while this movie certainly doesn't drop every ball, it definitely drops some. Because, to my utter dismay, this isn't the greatest movie of all time. The final Reckoning is surprisingly the most inconsistent singular entry in this entire series. For a series of ups and downs, this is the only movie where you feel it change from moment to moment. It's big, bloated, it's a little dull in spots, and ultimately rough in ways that the series has never been, especially not since Christopher McQuarrie took over the director's chair. We've got a few major issues that account for this, and some of these are based on how the story is constructed, so it's not like there are any easy fixes either. For one thing, I think Ethan Hunt spends a bit too much time away from the team. For what could be the final entry of the series, you want to see the team interact. You want to visit your on-screen friends for what could be the last time. And yet, the team spends most of this movie separated. Ethan leaves them about 32 minutes in, and they don't reunite until 80 minutes later. And even then, it's relatively brief as they all go their separate ways during the finale. The movie does try to remedy this at some spots though, credit where it's due, using editing tricks to still capture the feeling that they're all working together even if geographically they're in very different places.
That's your plan.
Exactly.
That's our plan.
On the flip side, the entity lacks teeth in this movie. So does Gabriel, honestly. After having failed to retrieve the key in the last movie, Gabriel has been outcast. Now he's doing a bit of scheming to try and gain control of the entity for himself. But as interesting as that might be, there's a 2-hour stretch in the middle of the movie where he's completely absent. He's just not around until the finale. It's crazy. Not to mention the lack of exploration into his and Ethan's shared history. There were brief flashes in the last movie, but they seem to imply that we get a bit more, or that there'd be some payoff or clash that would take this idea to its crescendo, but it never really does. There was a full scene film that was either supposed to open this movie or the last one, which detailed much more clearly the backstory between Ethan and Gabriel and the death of Marie that led to Ethan's big choice to join the IMF. But because of the de-aging effects on Tom Cruise, Christopher McQuarrie found the scene too distracting and ultimately cut it out. While that may be a necessary move, it does leave us with practically nothing for these characters in this movie. You want to explore this dynamic more, you want to see where these guys came from, and you want to see that coalesce in their final standoff. But you don't get that, and as a result, Gabriel is just kinda some guy in this movie. But as much as Gabriel himself is lacking this time around, I think I'm more disappointed in how the entity is ultimately handled. Because 2 months after the events of the last movie, the entity has infected cyberspace. It's made its presence known across the world and is now looking to launch everyone's nukes. Now, I'm well aware that the threat of nuclear Armageddon is very real, and the movie needed some kind of physical threat with a countdown that our heroes could stop. However, the entity going after nukes is a boring endgame. I'm sorry, it's just not interesting to me. Especially because nukes are well-worn ground in this series. Ghost Protocol centered on a villain trying to launch a nuke to spark nuclear war. Fallout had the villains trying to get a hold of plutonium to create nukes. We've been here. I'm going to make a comparison that may seem sacrilegious, but I want you to bear with me for a second. Remember in Avengers Age of Ultron when it was constantly warned that Ultron, another super powerful AI, might want to get his hands on nuclear codes? That was a big threat, however, he was never able to get his hands on the codes and instead turned a city into a meteor. I don't know about you, but I think turning a city into a meteor is a way more interesting doomsday plan than just launching a bunch of nukes. Not to say Mission Impossible needs to go to that level, these are obviously very different kinds of movies, but I am left hoping for a world-ending threat that's a bit more interesting. Like using the entity to manipulate the truth. This was all over the last movie, with the team having to constantly try and maneuver around the entity's lies, and getting tricked in the process a handful of times. But outside of some narration at the start, and maybe 2 acolytes during the rest of the movie, the idea of the entity controlling the truth is basically dropped. Probably because it's hard to make that a physical threat. It's hard for Ethan Hunt to punch AI in the face, which is why they must have avoided that aspect here. But it still feels like a missed opportunity to play into how the entity can really grasp onto our perception, and it would rely on our heroes to really outsmart it at every turn. Because at what point in this movie do our heroes manage to directly counteract the entity's will? At what point is it emphasized that our heroes can outsmart it? It doesn't even have to be big. It almost seemed like the last movie was setting up the fact that Ethan's humanity was part of the key. Ethan is not a complicated character. With all of the plotting and excess that goes into some of these missions, Ethan himself is often making the simple choice. He's fighting to save the one life on top of the millions.
Some flaw deep in your core being simply won't allow you to choose between one life and millions. And you see that as a sign of weakness. To me, that's your greatest strength.
And yet that particular aspect of this character, or any of these characters, is not really at play here at all. They just do standard Mission Impossible stuff, and that's what we're in for. There's no adjustment to the plan, no moment where Ethan's humanity powers through because that's the key. Again, it all feels like a big missed opportunity. If for nothing else though, the brief fight scene with one of the entity's acolytes does give us this line.
Hagar, you spent too much time on the internet!
I also think this movie is lacking in a couple areas when it comes to the identity of the Mission Impossible series. It's lacking things that make Mission Impossible, Mission Impossible. I'm gonna say Mission Impossible a few more times and you're gonna like it. For one thing, there aren't enough mask reveals. Mask reveals are the big staple of this series. It's when the movie can pull the once-over on you and you're like, oh my god, that's amazing. Dead Reckoning had 2 big mask sequences and they were both fantastic. This movie, however, has 2 really quick mask reveals right at the start, which are almost rushed by, and then nothing else for the rest of the movie. It kind of leaves us with a missing ingredient. The spycraft, the espionage, the fun. Where is it? It's not here. At the same time, I also think there aren't enough exotic locations. Now, we do visit a few places this time around. We of course start in London before moving to the frozen Bering Sea, all before the finale takes us to South Africa. But this still pales in comparison to doing a motorcycle chase through Paris, or a car chase through Casablanca, or climbing the outside of the Burj Khalifa. This movie spends so much of its runtime indoors or underground. It feels so much darker in a literal sense, as well as claustrophobic. We're in tunnels and caves and buildings and submarines, and so little time is spent above ground. Once you get to the finale in South Africa, it's like, oh my god, they're outside again. This is crazy. And then they immediately enter another cave. A lot of this, however, is kind of small beans. Like, I can get used to the lack of mask reveals or the fact that Ethan spends so much time separated from the team. I would have preferred otherwise, but I can get used to it. However, if there's anything that's super damning against this movie, it's the fact that the first hour is honestly kinda bad. This is what shocked me the most watching this movie for the first time. As it got started and as it began to play out, I was left scratching my head because of how choppy, rushed, and almost incoherent the first hour is. It's doing so much and it's not giving time to any of it really. It was especially true when the opening titles arrived 23 minutes in. The opening titles are the punch at the end of the cold open, where the theme kicks in and we're off to the races. All the previous movies have utilized the opening titles pretty well, Fallout and Dead Reckoning especially. But here, once the titles hit, they don't have the punch they really need. The lead-in isn't as impactful as it could be, and it's not like you could really move it to another spot because there's no other win in the first hour that gives the sequence its needed impact. But where it is, doesn't carry the same weight. It's not enough. Also, if I might be super pedantic, the font sucks. It's a bad font. Okay, let me take that back. The font itself is fine, but it's the wrong font. I don't know why they decided to use a different font for the titles instead of the normal Mission Impossible font. It looks weird. I don't like it. Why'd you change the font? At the same time, it feels like there are setups that are left without payoffs. Early on in the movie, Ethan Hunt communicates with the entity, where he not only discovers the entity's plan of worldwide nuclear destruction, but he also gets the ideas necessary to be able to take it down. The only thing is, the entity also decides to spook him a little by showing how his plans might go completely wrong. He might find the Sevastopol and ignite a warhead to explode, and then the whole team goes down. It's a scary premonition, obviously, and it even leads to Ethan warning Grace to stay off the ice so she can be safe just in case. But later in the movie, once Ethan gets to the submarine, that premonition is not on his mind at all. It's just not a concern in any way. And Grace still goes on the ice and has no dialogue or any hint that that's a little unsettling. So why show us that? Why show us that premonition with no follow-through? With no indication that Ethan manages to prevent that future from happening? Now, even among the choppiness of the first hour, there are a couple of scenes that work pretty well on their own. The shape and construction of everything around them might not be up to snuff, but individual moments still work. Namely, the death of Luther. Because yes, in an effort to firmly establish the stakes and add emotional impact early on, Luther Stickle dies. The only other member of the team that's been in every movie since the beginning bites the dust here in the final reckoning. And both Ving Rhames and Tom Cruise are playing it really well. They're trying to be calm for each other's sake, but it's also because on Ethan's part, he still thinks there's a way out. He still thinks there's a way to save Luther and come out of this unscathed. It's a bit of a slow realization for him that no, Luther's not going to make it out, but he's fine with that. Or at least he's acting as fine with it as he can so that Ethan can get away. And if this is to be the last entry in the series, killing Luther is a pretty fitting statement to make. No better way to give this movie a sense of finality than to take away one of the only constants this series has had. All we're really left with is the question, will Ethan Hunt die too?
Gabriel, you son of a bitch. No one is safe from Phineas Freeze.
The first hour of the movie also brings along two major retcons, tying things back across the entire series. One of these retcons is pretty good, the other, not so much. The bad one in my mind is the reveal that Jasper Briggs is actually not named Jasper Briggs at all. Instead, he is Jim Phelps Jr. Now, Jim Phelps was the main character in the original TV show, and he was played by Jon Voight in the first movie, revealed to be a traitor to the IMF. Briggs, as it turns out, is his son, who for one reason or another kept his identity a secret until this moment. But I think this takes away a lot of the air to Briggs' character. It feels like a forced tie-in to bring everything back to where this started, but it doesn't have enough impact on the whole movie to make it worth it. At the very least, they kind of underpin it by saying that Briggs isn't after Hunt for revenge. You know, it's not about clearing his father's name or carrying that pain for 30 years. Instead, he has his own goals, which does kind of make me wonder why do this twist at all if Briggs' motivations are disconnected, but I digress. If for nothing else, by the end it does manage to reconcile with not only the first movie, but the original show. I just wish it was done a bit better. Like the other major retcon here, the reveal of the rabbit's foot. J.J. Abrams' mystery box from Mission Impossible 3 was left available for anyone to deal with as they pleased. If someone wanted to explain what that thing was, they had an open invitation to do so. This movie chose to accept that mission. It's here that we reveal that the rabbit's foot was the initial form of the entity. Ethan Hunt brought it out of hiding and allowed it to grow and become the all-encompassing AI supervillain we have now. What this does is it places the entire blame of everything that's gone wrong in these two movies on Ethan's shoulders. If he hadn't stolen that thing back in MI3, none of them would be in this mess. Though of course, he stole it for a reason back then, to save his wife. But still, Ethan set this course of action into motion.
I sank that submarine as much as the entity did.
This adds a bit to his personal strife. This is on him, so he's gotta find a way to fix it. So, an open invitation finally accepted, a long-standing mystery in the franchise given a bit of a conclusion, which is fun. But, because with this movie there's always a but, this kinda goes nowhere. This is revealed in the first 20 minutes and is subsequently forgotten about as the rest of the movie continues. Outside of this scene, we see no indication that Ethan is impacted by this reveal. He allowed the entity to arrive. He's the reason Luther is dead, and yet it doesn't seem to impact the incoming plans or his mental state in any way as the movie continues. He doesn't reckon with this at all. There's no reckoning. You know, maybe this could be the central driving force for his character here. He's allowed this weapon to get out into the open and the stakes are higher than ever to shut it down and correct his error. It's kind of like if he let 3 plutonium cores get into the wrong hands, threatening a nuclear detonation that could starve 1/3 of the world's population.
Your blood will be on your hands. The fallout of all your good intentions.
Huh. This movie is kind of reheating Fallout's nachos, isn't it? And yet, this same team doesn't quite know what to do with that setup this time around. They knew how to capture those ideas really well there, but not here. Mission Impossible Fallout is all about Ethan Hunt dealing with an error he made at the start, and the consequences of that decision. And even then, that was a mission gone wrong. What does it do to this character to realize that a mission gone right, like the one in MI3, has led to all of this suffering? The final reckoning is simply not dealing with this element enough outside of this scene. And even then, as much as I like this particular retcon, the delivery on these reveals is pretty rough. One of the big criticisms coming out of this movie was that there was simply too much exposition. The movie takes the first 80 minutes to establish or re-establish everything we need to know. The Podkova lives within the Sevastopol, which can only be unlocked with a cruciform key, and if it's combined with Luther's poison pill created special in this movie, the team will have everything they need to kill the entity. The entity wants to hide in the Doomsday Vault in South Africa, and will do so after it gains control of everyone's nukes and someone lets it in. The poison pill will trick the entity into heading into a small drive that will instead trap it and prevent its plans, should the team accomplish everything in the blink of an eye. But on top of that vital information, the movie also takes a lot of time to look back at the series as a whole, including but not limited to an entire Mission Impossible is Awesome montage right at the start. Just 2 straight minutes of shots from the previous 7 movies. It's crazy. The question is, how are we supposed to feel during this? Nostalgic? Reminiscent? I'm not sure, because I don't think this really accomplishes any of those kinds of feelings for anyone in the audience. For someone who isn't familiar with the series, maybe even coming into this for the first time, they're gonna react like, Okay, I don't really care. And for someone who is familiar with the series, they'll be like, yeah, I remember. It almost feels like the movie is lacking faith in the audience and has to over-explain everything going on. The most egregious example in my mind is when the movie reintroduces Paris. Because as we reintroduce Paris here, the movie feels the need to flash back to where she ended up at the end of Dead Reckoning. But I remember. I saw that movie. I know where she ended up. It's alright. All you actually need is that brief moment during the montage of Ethan sparing her life. That's enough for me to fill in the blanks. I don't need to also be shown her turning against Gabriel at the end. Even the reveal of the rabbit's foot, it's delivered very strangely. It's a fun reveal on paper, but it plays out in the movie really awkwardly. Gabriel just walks into the scene and is like, hey, do you remember Mission Impossible 3? And that's how we get our reveal. And I can't help but think that there was a perfect way to set all this up for better emotional resonance. A way that is actually kinda in the movie already. Because if you wanted to flash back to the previous entries, you don't just give us a montage or random flashes here and there when you feel like we've forgotten. You place it all in that scene where the community members read Ethan Hunt's file. This is the perfect opportunity to flash back, to have each of these guys go over some or even all of Ethan's previous missions. That's where you can seamlessly set up the raid in Shanghai to steal the rabbit's foot, all before revealing the truth about it later. It's exactly how they deal with the setup for William Donloe. It's a stealth setup, using footage from the other movie to remind you of key moments, only to call back on it later with a surprise. And as you mix it in with everything else, you create a whole new kind of reaction. Because in this setup, every member of the audience has their own kind of surrogate. People not familiar with the series are learning about these escapades along with these characters. They get to be wide-eyed and surprised at all the stuff Ethan's been up to. But everyone who is familiar gets to be in on the joke. They get to be like Ethan and Kittredge and say, yep, he did do that. It was crazy. The only issue is that, you'd have to completely restructure the first hour of the movie to build the scene like this. Honestly, you'd probably have to restructure the entire movie to build the scene like this. So even if they had thought about presenting the information in this manner, they'd likely have to make a bunch of expensive and time-consuming changes that they maybe couldn't. The team behind this movie might have been caught in a bind and decided to do the best they could with what they had. In that case, it's a miracle it functions as well as it does, even though I don't really think the first hour functions at all. And admittedly, once this moment does come and Ethan is finally sent on his mission, that is when things start to smooth over. Things start getting a bit better once the mountain of setup is out of the way. And as the rest of the movie continues, it starts to bring in a lot more moments that are pretty good. A lot more moments that feel fitting for the final entry. Because as much criticism as I've laid against the Final Reckoning so far, I don't think it's a bad movie. In fact, I like it a lot more than I don't like it. Its issues are very prevalent, but it also has a lot going for it. This isn't the best movie of all time, but parts of it are the best movie of all time.
Where the hell are you going?
Now, this movie probably has a few too many new characters. We see a lot of new faces in this movie, and some of them take a bit too much time away from the characters we're familiar with. You know, every time they cut back to the bunker with the president and all those guys, it's a little like, man, can't we see more Benji instead? However, there are two additions to the cast here that genuinely liven up the whole thing and are real standouts. On one hand, you have Tramell Tillman as Captain Bledsoe.
You must be Captain Bledsoe.
And you must be out of your mind.
This guy is awesome. It helps that Tramell Tillman is giving it his all. He's fantastic here. I'd seen him in Severance before this as Mr. Milchick, and he's just as incredible there. One of the best characters in that show. He continues to be a standout here, and he's in the new Spider-Man movie? Come on, man. We've got ourselves a star in the making right here. Invest early in Tramell Tillman's stock, because I know I am.
Mister, if you want to poke the bear, oh, you've come to the right man.
This whole submarine crew is pretty great, honestly. You know, despite my complaint that Ethan spends too much time away from the team, everyone here is still fun. This was even referred to as the bisexual submarine after the movie came out, although I also heard it simply called the gay submarine. Now, I'm not sure if that's because everything here feels bisexually charged, or if it's because this place is a bisexual's dream. Either way, people latched onto it. The biggest surprise with the new additions, however, is a character that isn't even technically a new addition, because it brings me immense pleasure to say that William Donloe is one of the best parts of this movie. Here we have a connection to the original that is wholly earned. Another open invitation to see where this guy might have wound up after the first movie is totally fulfilled here. We discover that in the 30 years since the first movie, Donloe has been manning an old SOSUS listening station in Alaska. But while your expectations might be that Donloe's life was completely upended and ruined by Ethan Hunt breaking into the Black Vault in 1996, instead it sent his life on a trajectory he never could have expected. He's got a wife named Tepisa, who is another great addition here. It takes your expectations and flips them on their head, and it provides closure to this character in a way that's quite fun. The best part also, he and Tepisa become part of the team. They're not just here for the one scene, they actively become part of the adventure all the way to the end, which is great. The team itself is also a lot of fun. Our two major additions this time, on top of our returning cast of Ethan, Benji, and Grace, are Dega and Paris. Two minor antagonists from last time who flipped sides to help the IMF stop the end of the world. Paris especially is a great addition, and her dynamic with Benji is a real standout. They're almost polar opposites, but that's what makes it enjoyable.
Do either of you have any medical experience?
Psychiatry.
I can work with that.
But of course, why do we come to see a Mission Impossible movie? Why have we all gathered in the movie theater for this particular adventure? Well, it's because we want to see Tom Cruise try to kill himself on camera. More broadly, we're here for the action sequences. And while the final reckoning is decidedly lighter on the action compared to previous movies, it does have two major sequences which are, by all accounts, really damn good. First up, about halfway through the movie, Ethan Hunt finds the Sevastopol. His mission is to get inside, retrieve the Podkova, and get out. But not before he literally cranks open the aspect ratio, expanding the frame before diving into the sequence itself. Now, his goal sounds easy enough. Get in, get it, get out, right? Except for the fact that Ethan's presence leads to water being shifted from room to room, changing the weight balance of the entire thing so the submarine starts to move. It rolls across the ground, and Ethan's got to make it through while avoiding obstacles that are constantly changing around him. This sequence takes everything I like about the last stretch on the train in Dead Reckoning and dials it up to 11. Once again, it's all about Ethan versus physics. There is no way to reason with it, no morality behind it, it's simply unstoppable. Ethan's got to complete his objective while the whole thing spins. And with water going around and gravity changing as it does, it creates some spectacular looking shots. The sound design is also incredible. There's hardly any music during the sequence. Instead, all we get is the deep creaking and cracking of the submarine around Ethan as it spins and warps around him. It reminds me of Titanic, actually. There's an extended stretch in that movie where there's no music as the boat is starting to sink, and all you hear is the whine of the ship around them. It's like a horror movie monster looming over the main characters. Thankfully, Ethan does manage to escape with the Podkova in hand, which is perfect for the last stretch of the movie, the grand finale to the whole thing, which manages to remind us of what this crew is so good at doing when it comes to these action sequences. Not only are they a spectacle, with all sorts of great beats and moments that you can't help but watch slack-jawed, but they're also fantastic at spinning plates. We've got a bunch of threads going on simultaneously that are weaving in and out with ease. We've got Donloe, Tapisa, and Dega trying to defuse the bomb, creating a ticking clock. Grace is trying to break into a terminal to lay their trap for the entity. Meanwhile, Paris is performing surgery on Benji to keep him alive after a gunshot wound. Beyond that, we're revisiting the president and all those guys as they try to deal with the fact that they're moments away from the entity gaining control of their nuclear arsenal. And, of course, Tom Cruise is hanging off of a biplane. All of this added together is exactly what makes Mission Impossible what it has become. Big spectacle action sequences where everyone's got a part to play. We're flipping back and forth and we're watching Tom Cruise perform some life-threatening stunts. I mean, the biplane sequence here is absolutely incredible. It takes a hot minute to get to this point in the movie, like we're over 2 hours in before a biplane shows up, but damn, it's good. It's also a little bit familiar, because this finale feels very reminiscent of the helicopter chase scene at the end of Fallout. Is this whole movie just Fallout again? Ethan hangs onto the bottom of an aerial vehicle, climbs his way inside, takes control, and then begins an aerial chase. Meanwhile, there's a bomb defusal going on at the same time. But of course, as reminiscent as this might seem, the final reckoning does add a couple more things to the pile, including the beat where Ethan transfers from one biplane to the other, which is one of the most sweaty palm-inducing scenes in the whole series. Where Fallout ended with a fist fight on top of a cliff, the final reckoning keeps the final battle in the air as Ethan battles Gabriel for Luther's poison pill. And it's at this moment where Gabriel at least becomes fun. He's kind of toothless throughout this movie, but during the finale he's almost acting cartoonishly. People said he was like a Looney Tunes villain, and I can't really disagree with that. Especially when it comes to his death, which is I think the most unexpected yet funniest way he could have gone out.
Only one of us has a parachute! Good luck!
What a way to go, man. That's awesome. And finally, we get one last tense moment of Ethan falling from the biplane with his own parachute, as the countdown continues towards the endgame. Every piece is in place, the trap is laid out, the bomb is set to be at least somewhat diffused. All we need is for Ethan to connect the poison pill to the Podkova. Until, of course, his parachute lights on fire. This might be the moment that we've all been dreading. The final installment of the Mission Impossible series may end with the death of Ethan Hunt. The mission may be completed, but it might also be impossible to survive. The crazy part of all of this, though, is how this stunt came to be. According to the commentary track on this movie, Christopher McQuarrie found a video on TikTok that he, in all his wisdom, decided to show Tom Cruise.
The dumbest thing I've ever done was show Tom a video on TikTok of a guy taking a flare gun and setting his parachute on fire. Just thinking, hey, this will be funny to look at. And Tom said, we could do that. And I thought, oh no, I should never have done that.
I was like, that looks cool.
But with all the tension present, with every piece in place as the last seconds tick by, Ethan finally manages to connect the poison pill to the Podkova. Boom! The entity is trapped, and our team manages to come out of it unscathed. The entire team. Benji, Paris, Grace, Dega, Tapisa, Donloe, and Ethan Hunt. If this movie were in anyone else's hands, I think they would have pulled that particular trigger. I think in someone else's control, Ethan Hunt dies here. But these guys decided not to make that choice. They played up the tension, they got you thinking maybe this might be it, but in the end, there was a backup parachute and Ethan was able to get out of it alive. And as such, victory is secured. The entity is defeated. But this, of course, leaves us with a number of questions, primarily about the state of the world following the entity's fall. Because across the movie, we're told that if Ethan succeeds in killing the entity, it will result in the annihilation of cyberspace. The entity is just too well entrenched in the whole thing to be killed safely. But as we reach the end of the movie, we see that cyberspace is probably fine. The entity is trapped, and I don't see anyone really concerned about the consequences? Is it because the entity separated itself from cyberspace to head into the Doomsday Vault? Was it technically because it broke free on its own, so once it was trapped, it's fine? Or is it because the entity is still technically alive in this little drive that it's fine? Seems a little too open-ended for a grand finale. Like part of the stakes that were made clear earlier on are pretty much not addressed at all. If for nothing else though, we got a big speech from Luther, because before he died, he recorded a message on the poison pill, something that would be played once the mission was complete. Which also means Luther gets the last words. If this is to be the very end of the Mission Impossible series, Luther gets to say the very last spoken line in the entire thing.
This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Good luck, Ethan.
And at the very end, we get a spy's farewell, with each of our remaining characters reuniting at a distance in London. And one by one, they all fade into the crowd, as if to say their last goodbyes. Although admittedly, Benji's farewell feels less like a "it was a good run," and more like a "see you next week, Ethan." Maybe I'm misreading things, but that's really what it feels like at the end here. And as Ethan himself joins the crowd, the whole series comes to a close. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is not as good as the last few entries in the series. It's rough, it's choppy, it's a bit meandering, it's overstuffed in a lot of ways. It perhaps takes itself a bit too seriously as well. Like, there are a couple big stretches here where I'm like, I think we need some more comedy filtered in. These movies have sometimes expertly navigated between being serious and funny, and I think this movie errs a bit too much in the serious direction. Let's get some of those hijinks back in this series, come on. However, there's still a lot of exciting stuff in here, not to mention it's fascinating because of its flaws. I found myself coming back to this one a fair amount, and while my opinion is only hardened as I revisit it, I find myself interested in the flaws instead of being turned away by them, because something caught up with the filmmakers this time. The machine that managed to create Rogue Nation and Fallout tripped a bit on this one. Either they were caught by the pressure of making 2 movies at once, or the complications of COVID and the strikes weighed them down, or their methods simply didn't create the same effect they're always chasing. Maybe it's a combination of all of that, who knows? Either way, The Final Reckoning remains not the best movie in the series. Fallout pretty firmly holds that title for me. Critical reception to The Final Reckoning was quite tepid. There were quite a few positive reviews, with many critics coming out of this over the moon or at least appreciating what the movie does well, but at the same time, reception was a step worse than previous entries, and tons of reviews considered this to be a bit of a letdown. One review even said this might be the feel-bad movie of the summer, which is quite damning and not entirely inaccurate. Box office wise, this movie did manage to do a bit better than Dead Reckoning 2 years ago, making $64 million in its opening weekend before going on to make $197 million domestically and $598 million worldwide. Still not the most successful, falling short of a number of the movies before it, and it also probably didn't break even. If the reported budget of $400 million is to be believed, it'd be pretty hard for it to break even. Like, we're talking about a big loss here for this movie, it's crazy. Which of course might force this to be the last entry in the series. Not to mention McQuarrie's quote from the Dead Reckoning premiere about how the series would end once it stopped being entertaining. And if Mission Impossible fails to drum up a sufficient audience, and given that this latest movie was not the critical darling some people hoped for, that might be the death knell. For some, the series stopped being entertaining. Although, that being said, Tom Cruise might still decide one day that they're gonna make Mission Impossible 9. Whatever he says goes. It's just a matter of whether or not he'll say it. But if this does prove to well and truly be the end, that is Mission Impossible. This is still one of the all-time greats in terms of action franchises. It is still the top of the top when it comes to this stuff. Even if the series itself is wildly inconsistent and this last entry wasn't as well polished, there's still plenty to learn, plenty to aspire to, and plenty to enjoy on screen. And plenty of official recognition from award ceremonies. Kind of. On one hand, the Oscars are bound to introduce a stunts category for the 100th Academy Awards, which seems perfect for a movie like this where stunts are at the very center of its being. Only the 100th Academy Awards are going to be hosted in 2028. So they're kind of a few years late to award Mission Impossible with anything. But Tom Cruise himself did receive an honorary Oscar late last year, not just for Mission Impossible, but as a celebration for his entire 45-year career in the movie industry. Every one of his roles, how they've impacted the box office, culture, everything. Tom Cruise is still one of our biggest movie stars. He can still get people to show up to theaters based on his name alone, and that's worth acknowledging. But even with all of that, even with everything this series has done, one also has to wonder what its lasting legacy will be. Since The Final Reckoning dropped the ball a bit and some were turned off by Dead Reckoning before that, will its reputation crumble away? Will people forget when this series was at its peak? A bad or underwhelming ending can do that to you, you know. Not to mention, there has been a change in the air regarding Mission Impossible since Dead Reckoning. There was a vibe shift after 2023, which might be highlighted best by what's become of the Light the Fuse podcast. A podcast hosted by two guys who know more about Mission Impossible than anyone else. Two guys who are all in on the franchise and cover its updates with interviews galore. Their fan-run podcast was so successful, in fact, that it was made the officially licensed Mission Impossible podcast. Now that's exciting. They get to have even more access than they had before. They get to have some amount of official clearance and, oh, they stopped posting. Yeah, it was made official and then the whole thing just died. What's up with that? Paramount just stepped in and killed it? Thanks for nothing, David Ellison. Ugh. So who knows, ultimately, what the lasting legacy of the series will be. It may simply fall into obscurity, it may be forgotten, or the good will outweigh the bad, and those who were there every step of the way will remember how fantastic so much of this stuff really is. But with the entire series at our fingertips, with all 8 movies available to us, there's really only one thing that we have to do. We must rank the hair. In every Mission Impossible movie, Tom Cruise and Ethan Hunt sport a new hairstyle. Every time you can expect him to look just a bit different, and debates have continued for years over what hairstyle is the best. This is, in fact, the only real way to rank the Mission Impossible movies. Forget which one has the best action or the best story, it's which one has the best hair. Now it's time to throw my own hat into the ring and rank all 8 hairstyles from worst to best. Starting with Mission Impossible 1. This is my personal least favorite Ethan Hunt hairstyle. It's fine, but it's really only uphill from here. Dead Reckoning Part 1. It's too short. I don't like it. It's well cut and all that, it looks fine, but it's too short. It needs a bit more volume to it, I feel. Mission Impossible 3. This is like the ultimate middle ground. It's perfectly functional, it's your standard short haircut, it's what it needs to be, it's also nothing all that special. I'm gonna throw Ghost Protocol and The Final Reckoning here together. This is Tom Cruise going a bit longer with the hair. Not the longest, but longer. The thing about these two is that I kind of flip-flop between which one I prefer. Sometimes I like the unkempt nature of the Final Reckoning look, other times I like the well-cared-for nature of the Ghost Protocol cut, so they live here together. Fallout. Probably the definitive short hair look for Ethan. It's longer than Dead Reckoning, but it's not actually long. It's doing exactly what it needs to do. Mission Impossible 2. This is the one everyone loves. This is the ultimate Ethan Hunt hairstyle. The longest it's been in the series. It's almost majestic, honestly. And for many reasons, this may be the top choice, but I think there's one movie where the hair looks even better. Rogue Nation. This is it. This is my favorite Ethan Hunt hairstyle. It's not long, it's also not short. It's kind of in that perfect middle ground. It looks great, the way it's set up is great, the way it falls in certain scenes. This is it. Ethan Hunt has never looked better than he did in Rogue Nation. So there you have it, the definitive ranking of Ethan Hunt's hairstyles across the Mission Impossible series. With all of that said, I think I can firmly say that our mission has been accomplished. Across 30 years and 8 movies, Mission Impossible is a series for the history books. And it's almost amazing how despite his continuous attempts, Tom Cruise is still alive and kicking today. Now he's heading out of the action scene for a comedy movie later this year called Digger. Who knows how that'll turn out? We'll have to wait and see. For now, his time as Ethan Hunt has come to a close, which means this chapter with the IMF has wrapped up. It's been a hell of a ride, and one that's been exciting to see unfold in interesting and unexpected ways. Now, with our time among the IMF tapering out, we've got to switch gears once more. Where are we heading next? Well, I think you should get out your compass, because I think it's high time we sailed into the Caribbean and dabbled in a little bit of piracy. Until then, however, this message will self-destruct in 5 seconds, and I will see you guys later.